All right, guys, welcome to the first episode of our Blue Chip Basketball Performance Talks. Today we're going to be talking about nutrition basics. This is going to be the first of 3 nutrition talks that we have lined up. Today we're going to be discussing why diet is important. We're going to talk about macronutrients, which are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And we're going to talk about reading food labels and ingredient labels as well in foods, why that's important, and why you're going to start doing it. We're not going to go in depth on that. You don't need to be an expert in it. We're going to try to keep everything here pretty basic, and it's going to be all about trying to make this applicable for you and how it can make you a better athlete and better basketball player. We're not going to try to throw you a bunch of science that's going to go way over your head. My name is Speer. I'm a chiropractor, strength and conditioning coach, former college basketball player, and I help you guys out at Blue Chip. More importantly, for this presentation, I've spent a lot of the last 6 or 7 years of my life studying things in the nutrition field. A lot of it was mainly because I wanted to learn how to become the best athlete, best basketball player that I could be. And I've also had some allergies in my life, and I've also had just some other health issues that nutrition ended up playing a huge part of in helping get rid of some of those allergies and health problems. And so that kind of just led me down the rabbit hole of studying nutrition and learning about what it could do for the body. And I wanted to share that information with you guys here. And basically this is all about how to become the healthiest human being that you can be and the best athlete and basketball player as possible. All right. So a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers don't always want to eat healthy, right? Because it's not always the best tasting food out there. A lot of the most common arguments against this are, let's take a basketball player, for example, to say, this is the way that I always eat, and I play well and I feel good for the most part. So an argument against this is basically, well, you can always improve. And, just because you play good and you feel good on your not so great diet doesn't mean that there's not room for improvement and you can't take it to the next level by adding a good nutrition plan into your life. Another argument against eating healthy is that, one bad meal doesn't really seem to affect me a whole lot, or, several bad meals or eating bad over time doesn't seem to affect me a whole lot. And a lot of people say, eating bad at the moment doesn't actually kill me, so they don't really think about the negative consequences that it has over the long term. And that's what it's all about. If you eat, let's just say if you eat McDonald's, one meal today, it's probably not going to affect you a whole lot. But if you were to do that every day for weeks and months and years down the road, it's obviously not going to put you in a good place in terms of your health, in terms of your weight, in terms of your athleticism. Another argument against eating healthy is that it's expensive, and that can be true at times. And in the second or third video that we're going to do, I'm going to talk you through some practical ways for grocery shopping and how you can eat healthy on a pretty reasonable budget. Still, it's eating healthy can be just as cheap as eating unhealthy if you're doing it right at the grocery store. So we'll walk through that later. Right now we're going to talk about macronutrients. So right now there's macronutrients and there's micronutrients. Macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Those are what help make up calories. Then there's micronutrients. Micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. Those are the things that we need to create energy, to basically they help give us energy, and they help us build muscle and things like that, which protein does as well. But micronutrients do a lot of those little things that basically help keep your body running and functioning at a high level, basically. Of course, the calories, they keep us going a lot of the time, but the micronutrients help do those little things for us. So we want to talk about macronutrients initially, because that's going to lead us into reading food labels as well. Carbohydrates, they are quick sources of energy that are stored in our muscles and our liver for the most part. If we ever eat too much carbohydrates, they are converted into fat in our body. So fun fact, fat does not actually make you fat unless you eat too much of it. But eating too many carbs, that's what puts body fat on your body. Fibers, starches, sugars, those are all probably things that you've heard of. Those are examples of carbohydrates. The pictures that you see here to the right, all examples of carbohydrates. We should be eating plenty of carbs that are high in fiber while being a little bit more picky of the ones with sugar and starches. So basically, you want a lot of fiber in your diet. You want very low sugar and added sugar in your diet, though. We'll talk about a lot of this later. So going to protein, which is what everybody wants to talk about for building muscle, and it does help build muscle. Overall, protein just helps form and build any sort of tissue in your body, basically. Things from your hair and your skin to your muscles, your bones, your ligaments, your tendons, all of those things are built up in part by protein, which are actually, they're made up of amino acids, if you've heard of those as well. High amounts of protein is typically found in most of your animal proteins, things like nuts and beans, and everything has protein in it to a certain extent, but mainly animal proteins are where most of the protein is, including fish, pork, poultry, things like that. Adequate protein is important, but you don't want too much and you don't want too little. And we'll talk about this a lot more in, I believe, video 3. We're going to talk about adequate protein intake. You certainly don't want too little, but having too much is also not great for your health. Here's a big myth. People think that if a food has protein in it, then it's automatically good for me. That couldn't be further from the truth. All protein is not good for you. So there are good and there are bad sources of protein, just like with carbohydrates and just like with fats. There's good fats and there's bad fats. There's good carbs and there's bad carbs. Same thing applies here to protein. I know you can't see the picture of the steak there very well on the bottom right, but steak is an example of a pretty good source of protein. But you see the fried chicken there in the middle, not the best source of protein. And we can talk about some of those things a little bit more in the future. But just know that just because a food has protein in it doesn't make it an awesome food all of a sudden. Okay, fats. A lot of myths out there about fats. And so again, carbs, proteins, and fats are 3 macronutrients that help make up the calories that we consume. So fats help support many of our tissues in our body, mainly our cells and our nervous system. So our brain, our spinal cord, all the nerves that go to our muscles and joints. A lot of that is made up of fats. Fats can also be a source of energy. Fats also store vitamins and minerals, which is why it's very important to have fat in your diet, to not just cut out all fat, because one, that's a detriment to our nervous system and our brain function, our reaction time, but also vitamins and minerals are stored in our body. Most vitamins and minerals, I should say, are stored in our body in the fat cells, which again, just ingesting fat doesn't always create fat, but we absorb vitamins and minerals much better in our body if we're ingesting fats. Of course, many know fats were demonized for many years, but current research heavily supports the consumption of healthy fats for a variety of reasons, including cardiovascular health, which is one of the reasons fats were demonized for so many years, is because you'd have heart disease and cardiovascular health if you consumed fats. I couldn't be further for the truth in terms of healthy fats. Again, just like carbs and proteins, there's good fats and there's bad fats. If you see avocado here, you see olive oil down there, both examples of good fats, of healthy fats. In the middle, again, I'm using the example of fried chicken. Fried chicken's got a lot of fat in it, not a healthy source of fat. And that's mainly because of trans fat, which we'll talk about here in a second. So reading food labels. Here's an example of a food label that I believe it was Lucky Charms, I believe I pulled it from, all your guys' favorite cereal, right? So using the information that we just gave you guys, you should start reading food labels when you're at the grocery store, when your parents buy you food that you have now at the house or drinks that you're consuming. I want you guys to start looking at the food labels. So overall, we want foods that are fairly high in protein. Doesn't need to be crazy high, but just, they've got an adequate amount of protein. We also want healthy fats, and we want carbs that have a decent amount of fiber and are very low in added sugar. The reason that is important is because you don't have a lot of empty calories in these foods. Empty calories, on the other hand, provide no vitamins, no minerals, basically, and you're just consuming a bunch of calories that are typically pretty high in sugar, pretty high in trans fats. A lot of added sugar and trans fats just in general are not good for our body. It's not going to help you build muscle. It's not going to help your athleticism. It's going to decrease inflammation. It's going to dampen your recovery. We want to avoid those foods for the most part. We'll talk about that a little bit more in another video. But you should not be consuming any foods that are high in sugar or added sugar or have any trans fat in it. So basically, I want you to think of added sugar and trans fat. So if you go to the picture here on the right, you'll see total fat. You'll see that Lucky Charms at least does not have any trans fats, so that's good. But if you go down to the carbohydrates, you'll see there's 30 carbs there and 12 of them are added sugars. That's a ton, especially when only 2 of them are fiber. So if it was 30 carbohydrates, 2 grams of fiber, and 0 added sugars, I'd say, okay, that's at least a decent food. But there's not a ton of fiber in there, and there's 12 grams of added sugar. That's a ton. Only 3 grams of protein, not a lot. Especially if you look here, this is just 1 cup of Lucky Charms. I guarantee you, none of you are just eating 1 cup of Lucky Charms. That's usually 2 to 3 cups you guys are typically having in one setting, I'm guessing. Plus, when you combine this with skim milk too, skim milk doesn't have any fat in it. Lucky Charms only has 1.5 grams of fat in a cup, so you're not getting, basically any healthy fat in this breakfast, and so that doesn't bode well for absorbing the vitamins and minerals and supporting your nervous system, which you heavily need as an active athlete in your recovery process. So this is how you read food labels. You go through, you can look at the fats, look at the trans fats, look at how many carbohydrates there are, look at the added sugars, and look at the protein amounts. Again, we want to aim for foods that have a decent amount of protein, that there are healthy fats, meaning there's no trans fats in the food. We want no trans fats, not even, sometimes it'll say 0.5, meaning there's a 0.5 gram of trans fats. We want no trans fats. And then we want a very low amount of added sugar, which 12 grams in 1 cup is not a low amount of added sugar, and 3 grams of protein is not enough. So that's reading food labels. We're gonna start off next talk with talking about how we read ingredient labels as well.